You guys probably have my email, but it's up here and it'll be at the end of the presentation as well. So this is a FrogWatch Lite. It's the same exact information that you guys all got. I just configured it a little bit differently, just for it to flow a little bit more efficiently. So tonight we are going to be talking about what got me into frogs and conservation and a little bit of my backstory and previous jobs that I've held. I'm going to talk very briefly about what the Calvert Marine Museum is doing. We recently, last year, got a grant with the Chesapeake Bay Trust to do some additional frog conservation related things. So I'll talk about that briefly. We'll also talk about citizen science and frog watch, and then we'll learn about the local frogs and toads. So, where it all started. So, I grew up in Arlington County, which is a very urban county in Virginia. And my dad took me out, I think, when I was 5 years old to listen to frogs calling behind where he worked. And something clicked, and I thought it was the coolest thing. So, as you can see, me and my brother in the top left corner, I was always trying to look for critters ever since I can remember. And around high school is when I realized it might be more than just a passion and a hobby, but it could actually be a job. And to this day, my dad and I still go out on herping related activities and things like that. So for the eclipse, we went out to Oklahoma and Arkansas to see some really cool critters out that way. We've gone to California together. So it's just kind of neat that where it started locally, it has gone global. So, how it's going. So, once I graduated high school and started going to college, I worked at Long Branch Nature Center in Arlington, Virginia, and that's kind of what got me my passion professionally for native species and then also for talking to people. Most animal people that you meet don't really want to talk a whole lot to people. I like both. And after I think I was there for about 4 years or so. I graduated in 2008, and in 2011, I started at the National Zoo in DC, where I worked in the Department of Herpetology. So that one was a dream job of mine, and I got to work with really cool animals like giant tortoises and Komodo dragons and Chinese alligators. But I noticed I was always trying to bring it back locally just to get people thinking about what they were doing in their own backyards. While I was at the zoo, I also got involved with the Virginia Herpetological Society, and I'm actually the president of that society currently. Previously, I was too. But basically, it's to kind of get folks out and exploring the natural world around them and seeing what Virginia has to offer. But currently, I'm at the Calvert Marine Museum, and we have about 700 individual animals, depending on what's breeding and what's not, of around 70 to 75 species, so primarily fish, but we do have reptiles and amphibians as well. Rebecca did mention that we did open a Hellbender exhibit about a year and a half ago, but I would say our pandas of the Calvert Marine Museum are our two North American river otters, which just celebrated 10 years at the Calvert Marine Museum. So they're not so young anymore. So what is the Calvert Marine Museum doing? So in other presentations, I would go into more detail about our exhibit on hellbenders and some of the native plant gardens that we put in. Just for the sake of time, I'll just be talking about the Chesapeake Bay Trust grant that we received last year in our acoustic recorder study. And then I'll also be talking about citizen science and frogwatch. So the acoustic recorder project is what you see pictured here. These are just like what it sounds like, acoustic, noise, sound, things like that, and then recorder is recording those sounds. And so we got a grant to describe local species diversity with the frogs and toads that we have in southern Maryland and the northern neck of Virginia. And a big part of this was not only to record the frogs and toads, we wanted to try and expand monitoring sites in the region, which you'll see in the next few slides, but also educate the next generation. We were working closely with St. Mary's College of Maryland and kind of showing students how to do some field work, as well as the James A. Forrest Career and Technology Center in Leonardtown. Again, showing students that yes, you could learn about all these cool topics in books and in the classroom and things like that, but we also got to go out in the field and show them how to install and go through the sounds. So last year we had a total of 10 acoustic recorders that we put out. And so you can see we have some up here in Charles County, we have some in Calvert, and then we have some in southern St. Mary's as well as the northern neck of Virginia. The point for the northern neck of Virginia was to try and help describe some species there. It's a historically low herp diversity just because a lack of public lands and a lack of surveying. So we wanted to try and beef up some species numbers there. And then the areas we focused on in southern Maryland and Charles County, especially, was to try and find additional populations of carpenter frogs, which haven't been found reliably in a couple of decades. And then same for St. Mary's. Down here, we have the state endangered eastern narrowmouth toad. So just trying to expand additional sites where these guys could reside. So the data analysis of this project, so with 10 recorders, we had 28,836 5-minute sound files. So that's the equivalent of me listening to these 5-minute sound files nonstop back to back for like 90 days straight with no sleeping, no breaks, none of that. But thankfully, there's sound analysis software, which is what we used, and we were able to kind of bait the system with known frog calls, and then they would try and the system would parse out similar frequencies. And so, as you can see here, with just the sampling of some of the frogs and toads, that they all have pretty unique sound structures. Say for this green frog right here, one of the sites was at St. Mary's College of Maryland, and it happened to be a site where a lot of the students like to kind of hang out and sometimes get a little loud and scream and burp and all of those funny kind of things. And I was able to actually, sometimes those burps were confused by the system with the green frog, but visually I can go through and see that if it didn't have this acoustic pattern, that it wasn't a green frog. So pretty quickly I learned, yes, listen to the sounds, but also I could go through visually and see what species are what. And similar here for the American toad, you could see these two straight acoustic lines. Sometimes there are sirens from like an ambulance or something like that that would be going down the road about a third to a half a mile away. So that just shows how accurate and sensitive these sound recorders are. And I could kind of visually tell by the pattern if it didn't have kind of like a tapering motion, kind of like the mouse is doing right now, that it would actually indeed be the American toad. So the results, we got 11 species across the 10 sites, the most common being the green frog and the Cope's gray tree frog, which were found at 8 of the 10 sites. The most species is at the Nanjemoy Creek Environmental Education Center down in Nanjemoy, where there were 7 species that recorded calling. We didn't get any state endangered species or species of special concern for Maryland, but we did get the eastern spadefoot, which was found at 5 of the 10 sites. This is pretty substantial since usually with FrogWatch, we will only record these guys at 1 or 2 sites a year. So being able to record them at half of all the sites that these recorders were deployed was pretty exciting. These guys are a fossil real species and only come out 1 or 2 nights a year to breed, and that's it. So it's usually these very large, explosive breeding events. So where most likely spadefoot occur all across Maryland, you have to be in the right place at the right time. And with these recorders being out every single night, if they live in that area, they're going to be detected. So what does 2026 hold? Well, we got an additional grant through the Cove Point Natural Heritage Trust. Chest Packs allowed us to borrow those 4 recorders again this year. We still have the recorders from last year from that Chesapeake Bay Trust grant. And then Pax River, which is a naval base in St. Mary's County, they had a partnership with the Partners in Amphibian and Reptile Conservation, where they got an additional 3 recorders that they allowed us to go through the data. So we'll actually have 22 recorders this year, which sounds pretty daunting, and it will be going through all that data. Um, so we decided to try and do more sites in the Middle Peninsula and in the northern neck of Virginia. Lake Anna State Park. I led 2 surveys here. The first time when I was president in 2018 of the Virginia Herpetological Society. And then again, I did another follow-up survey in 2022 to try and get additional species. I think Spotsylvania County, where Lake Anna is the only county in Virginia that does not have bullfrogs as a verified species. So we're hoping to change that this year. And then we're doing additional sites with Maryland DNR, and then additional sites at Cove Point to try and get some rare species there, as well as partnering with other Calvert County local parks that had their own recorder to do some bird studies. So the cool thing with the acoustic recorders, you can use them for frogs. More commonly, they're used with birds during the daytime, and you could also use them for bats as well. So FrogWatch. So it's a nationwide citizen science program. There's currently 138 chapters across 35 states. Although there are 138 chapters right now, not all of them are active. So I did just find out the Western Maryland chapter is not really as active anymore. So even if you have sites all across Maryland, um, just reach out to me and I'll let you know if there's any additional species or anything like that, but you can still be a part of this chapter. So currently, FrogWatch is run by the Akron Zoo. They took over in 2022. Originally, FrogWatch started with USGS in 1998, and then AZA, the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, took over in 2008. But currently, it's run by the Akron Zoo, and it basically has citizen scientists, hopefully like you guys tonight, record auditory observations. And I'll go through protocols in a few slides. So our chapter, the Southern Maryland and surrounding DMV chapter, started in 2013 when I was at the National Zoo, then was the National Zoo chapter. But when I moved down to the Calvert Marine Museum, we were able to kind of rebrand, but still hold on to all of the sites and volunteers that we had. So 2026 is our 14th year, so it's crazy to think it's gone by that quick. Last year, kind of like Rebecca mentioned, we had 1,263 observations with the recorders. So they lent about 456 additional observations, but just in raw observations from volunteer input was 807 observations. So that's nothing to sneeze at. That's incredible. And since 2013, we've had over 5,400 observations submitted. And so this is just an example right here of all the areas our chapter monitors. We do have a gentleman in Tennessee that used to live in DC that submitted observations down there. He just has a few extra species. We got permission to allow him to keep monitoring. But as you can see here, we have sites in West Virginia, and out here in kind of western northern Virginia. Um, when I was at the National Zoo, we have a location out in Front Royal where we would do some trainings. So that's how we have a lot of these sites. Obviously, the DC metro area, Huntley Meadows is another huge site. We have the park. They monitor 4 sites there, and they've been submitting data since like 2015. So they've been around with us for quite some time. And then now Southern Maryland. So a big focus on Calvert, just because the Marine Museum and Calvert County Parks and Rec, who's one of the additional chapter leaders, Kim Curran, were both in Calvert. So that's where there's the big focus. Last year, we were trying to focus on getting more sites in St. Mary's, working with the schools down there. And this year, we're trying to get a few more sites in Charles, but we're also hoping to get some sites on the Eastern Shore as well. But honestly, wherever you are, we'd be more than happy to have you be part of this chapter. And so if you want to reach out through the chat or through email afterwards too, we're super excited to have you. So why participate? So you get to describe local species diversity. You can find rare species, which was not true when I was running these programs in DC. But in Southern Maryland and the Eastern Shore, we have species like the Eastern Narrowmouth toad, we have the barking tree frog, and the carpenter frog that are all either state endangered or state protected. But really, I think the coolest thing is to get you outside. So I know there's a lot of folks that reach out to me about, well, I have a child that's 8 that I would like to bring along. As long as the child can be quiet, and I know they can because I was when I was 8, when I was going out listening for frogs, I think it's great because you might have another moment like I had with my dad, and we might have a future frog watcher chapter leader in 20 years leading the same training, which would be pretty cool. You get to also help track introduced or invasive species, which historically we did not have here, but I did find out last year in some sites down in St. Mary's County, we do have the introduced squirrel tree frog. So in other areas like Florida, there's definitely a lot more introduced or invasive species down there, but we do have some up here in Maryland. And you can also help track frog declines as well. Really briefly, I am going to mention, because it is important to know about amphibian declines. So there's been dramatic declines over the past 30 years. Globally, half of all amphibians are threatened with extinction. And you can just see habitat loss, fragmentation, pollution, non-native invasive species, climate change, parasites, disease. When I do this with high schoolers or middle schoolers, I'll always ask, have any of these happened locally? And the answer is yes, all of them. But the example of the frog I have up here is the Panamanian golden frog. These guys are extinct in the wild, and what wipes them out is the disease called chytrid fungus. So I did want to just briefly talk about the chytrid life cycle really quick. So chytrid is a pretty broad species of fungus, but specifically amphibian chytrid is what affected the Panamanian golden frogs. They think chytrid kind of moved through the United States in the 50s through 70s and was kind of working its way southward, even though there's now kind of evidence that there's several different inflection points where chytrid, I guess, was sort of introduced. They're not sure how it came here. There's studies that say some think it's the African clawed frog, others think it was people that brought it in, or not disinfecting footwear or field gear and stuff like that. But essentially, you have a fungus that seeks the frogs out, and the spores will burrow into their skin and then mature into a fungus that then can spread. And that's what everyone thinks about, like the fruiting bodies or things like that. Spores are released after 4 to 5 days, so it doesn't take long for them to kind of get colonized. And it'll take about 120 days for the infected frogs to die. So specifically, the Panamanian golden frog is very susceptible to this because it affects their electrolytes and water absorption, so it makes them go into cardiac arrest. But for local species like bullfrog and green frogs and stuff like that, that can carry it. They can also have activities like basking that will help limit or control the fungus. There's other amphibians like the redback salamander that have peptides on their skin that inhibit the growth of chytrid, so they won't even get it. Just Atelopus zetekai, the golden frog, and other genus of frogs worldwide. Some just are more susceptible than others. And when you think about the cloud forest that Atelopus zetekai once was found, they don't have ways to kind of regulate body temperature to help get rid of the fungus. So wetlands. I've had people go, why do we need to know about wetlands if we're learning about frogs? But essentially, when you guys start to develop your own sites and things like that, you really want to know the presence of the water and kind of the origin of the water and kind of what type of habitat um, you're going to be observing in. So if you think about just what is a wetland, plants that can grow in saturated conditions sounds kind of obvious, right? Soils that lack oxygen just because water is present most of the time. And you're going to have water during some part of the growing season. You might have a vernal pool where it dries out. Um, but I will actually show you some of the types of wetlands that we have. So we have swamps, and so we have a lot of these in southern Maryland and throughout Maryland. Um, it is more indicative of the southeastern United States, but again, we do have some swamps around. So if you think about key plants like bald cypress, they're gonna have these buttressing roots that kind of come out like a bell bottom. And then you're gonna have a lot of these cypress knees that pop up, and that's just a way for these plants to get a little bit more oxygen. You can have bogs, which we definitely have around here. Again, not the most common one though. Most of the time, you'll see keystone plants like sphagnum moss. In some areas, you might get like pitcher plants, or if you're down south, maybe Venus flytraps and things like that. But this water will be fairly acidic, and a lot of the frogs that live in these boggy areas, like say the Pine Barrens tree frog, they actually require acidic water for their eggs and young to develop. Marshes, which we have a ton of these in Maryland. Um, some they can be tidal as well, but obviously for the sake of frogs, you're going to want fresh water. But if you take a look, a lot of them are going to have this soft stem emergent vegetation like grasses and cattails and things like that. That would usually be kind of more of a marshy habitat. Wet meadows are more common in rural areas. They resemble kind of grasslands, but they're gonna be saturated with a lot of creeks running through. We don't have too many wet meadows around here, though. Vernal pools are super important. We have a ton of these all throughout the eastern United States. But these are very important for amphibians just because they are fish free, because they dry out during the summer, so fish are not able to survive. And because of that, amphibian life, as well as some invertebrate life, thrives. And so, usually around the fall is when the water starts to fill back up. We were in a drought, so a lot of our vernal pools were not filling back up, but the marbled salamanders will breed around then. And by the time late winter comes, when a lot of the, say, tiger salamanders, spotted salamanders, spring peepers, wood frogs start to come in, the marbled salamanders already have a head start because they overwinter as larvae. And then in the late spring, you might get some of the other ones like spadefoot or American toad or Fowler's toads coming through, and they are pretty good at morphing out quickly because come early summer, a lot of these pools will dry up and they will have to get out before then if they want to survive. We also have a lot of man-made bodies of water, and that is perfectly fine because if you build it, they will come. One of the most active sites I have in Prince Frederick is at a high school that is right next to a busy road. That it's kind of like a water retainment site, and I mean I've heard probably about 8 species of frogs there, five calling at the same time. So just because it's man-made does not mean they won't use it. You could also get man-made ponds. Ones that are open like this is not as great just because those animals will be sitting ducks. If there's a lot of vegetation along the outskirts of it, it'll be definitely a healthier habitat that you might get a few more additional species there. You could also have urban wetlands, or kind of like I said, like retainment pools and stuff like that with apartment complexes, or kind of big city centers and things like that. It is a law just to kind of contain a lot of that water. And because of that, you'll almost have permanent water year round. One of the sites that I have in Prince Frederick, I was actually just finishing up happy hour with a friend, and I was going to my car in the parking lot, and I was like, "Whoa, I hear green tree frogs!" And again, it was one of these urban wetlands, and it is a very, very healthy population of both Cope's gray tree frogs and green tree frogs. So, like I said, just because you build a pond and nothing's coming that first year, just wait, because if you build it, those animals will come. So I will let you guys know a few things because we do have two assessments. So whenever you guys are ready, I will be sending quiz links at the end of this, but you can take your time. I would say try and do it within a week just so we're not waiting forever to get started. But we want to ensure that you know what you're doing when you go out there. So you want to score at least a minimum of 80% on the volunteer training assessment of the protocols, which we'll be going over. And I will say, hint, hint, this could be important. A lot of the important um, information that could be on that quiz is underlined, so that's a big hint right there. And then also, you want to score at least at 80% on the frog and toad call identification. And we'll be going over that at the end of the training. But practice makes perfect. And so, the website that I sent out to you guys to practice calls, I would keep up with that. So site selection, it's not a requirement to go weekly, but I say try and make it a habit. Just because then you go, oh, it's Thursday. I need to go out and do my frog watch observation, just so you don't forget to do it. Um, I say make sure it's convenient because if you have to drive 30 minutes to get to this site, that's not very easy. And pretty quickly you'll get burnt out and might just kind of drop out of doing observations. I would try to make sure it's a quiet area. As you'll learn with the protocols coming up, there is an acclimation period you kind of have to wait. And so if something like cars keep driving by that scare the frogs and stop them from calling, that might not be the best site for you to do data collection. Also, make sure it's legally accessible. Just because you went to this training does not mean you have permission to go into a park after dark. So work with a lot of the parks, like I said, Huntley Meadows and a lot of the Fairfax County parks. We're more than happy to have people jump on and do observations. They just had to know when and where, and they just had to get information from them as well. So if you have any interest, I can help put you in contact with people, just because I've been in the field for a little while. But especially in Maryland, outside of the Beltway, it seems like there is a lot more kind of wet areas that people can kind of have a pond in their neighborhood or on their property or something like that. And then we'll do a demo on how to enter that data into FieldScope and how to use FieldScope. So prior to arriving at your site, you want to practice identifying the calls. Just because you have a site and you go there, you don't know what you're listening for, it's kind of pointless, right? You also want to make sure that there is appropriate weather conditions, so above 35 degrees, which it definitely was today, so that's exciting. And then it's not raining too hard and not too windy. We'll go over the Beaufort wind scale in a few slides as well. Also, this is really important. Plan to monitor at least 30 minutes after sunset. So the FrogWatch protocols do closely align with the North American amphibian monitoring protocols, which is 30 minutes after sunset and then as late as 1 a.m. But after that, it seems like frogs kind of taper off. So a majority of the FrogWatch observations I've seen are usually around like 9 p.m. to 11 or so. But obviously, say, because the frogwatch season has started, even though there's nothing calling, the sun sets a lot earlier in late winter and early spring. So, I mean, you can have observations, at like 6:30, just because that's 30 minutes after sunset. There is required information, but all of this will be on the practice field scope link that we do. So I'm just going to skip over this. The Beaufort wind scale is 0 to 5, at least for the sake of frog watch, because as you can see, there's a lot more like a hurricane. Like we're not going to be doing frog watch during that. But for the sake of frog watch, it's 0 to 5. So as you can look up here, they are very poetic in how they describe kind of the breeze and things like that. But again, this is up to you. So if you feel like you feel the wind on your face or something like that, then that could be a Beaufort wind scale of a 2. And so I'm not going to be looking through the FrogWatch data sheets and be like, oh, I think it was a 3 that night and not a 1, because it's going to be different at each site. So 0 to 3 are the 4 levels on the Beaufort wind scale that are appropriate for observations. Anything windier than that usually means a storm is coming or it's just going to be really breezy. The frogs, it's going to be a little bit harder for them to hear each other. But also, if they're calling from like the cattails and stuff, they're not going to be clinging on to dear life just to call. So if it is very, very windy, it's probably not a good night at all to do a frog watch observation. So with the monitoring protocol, there is an acclimation period and then also a monitoring session. So the acclimation period is 2 minutes, and that's mainly because as the frogs call, they're drawing attention to themselves and where they are. If something large comes over, there's probably a predator that's listening to their calls and trying to find them. So they usually lay silent. Sometimes they'll even go underwater. And because of that, as we go up to these wetland sites, we want to make sure they get used to our presence. And so that acclimation period is 2 minutes in length, which is important. But the monitoring session is 3 minutes in length, and that's it. And so that's what I love about this program is that it's quick and to the point. It's not a huge time constraint. It's not a huge time suck or anything like that. It's one and done. And so because of this, I'll usually do several frog watch sites a night. I have a few wetlands in my neighborhood, which I'm thankful for. So I'll just walk my dogs a few nights a week, and then I'll just go to different areas to kind of get some of these different sites as well. But because it's a pretty short acclimation period and then a short monitoring session, that's it. So you're going to listen to, identify, and remember all the frogs that you hear during that session. Thankfully, now we have smartphones. When we first started doing these trainings, they weren't as popular as they are now. I think now it's like 95% or 90% of the nation has a smartphone of some type. So you can actually fill these out on Field Scope while you are in the field, which makes it even more convenient. And if for any reason that the frogs stop calling, if it's interrupted by a car going by, a plane flying overhead, a fox screaming nearby, or an owl calling, you're gonna have to restart that 2 minute acclimation period and then restart that monitoring session. So that's why I say try and choose a quiet site. So the calling intensity is rated from 0 to 3. So this is also important as well. So 0 means there's no frogs or toads that have heard calling, which is pretty self-explanatory. A rating of a 1, individuals can be counted and there's space in between the calls. So you can easily identify how many are calling. A calling intensity of a 2, you can still count individuals, but there's going to be some overlapping or interrupting of the calls. And then three is a full chorus. So when it's continuous and you really can't count individuals anymore, that's a three. And you could have a three, or you can have a three with like five exclamation points where your brain's ringing. So if you've ever been out in the field and heard a full chorus of spring peepers, that would be that three with five exclamation points. It's still a three. So as long as you can't count individuals anymore, that's a full chorus. So now we're going to go into field scope. So the link is right there, but I will send it in a follow-up email as well when you guys take the assessment. But it's just frogwatch.fieldscope.org, and that's this website right here. So log in. You guys are going to create an account if you don't have one already. So a username that you can remember, your email, and that email, make sure it's an active one and not a junk one, because if I do see something that seems off, like a 5 minute monitoring session, I will email you to either change that or I'll go in and edit it. Just because it will get flagged in the system if it's not 3 minutes in duration, just because it's not following the protocol. That's them, not me. So I'm not trying to be too much of a stickler. So just put your first and last name, your organization. I mean, this doesn't really matter. You can just say FrogWatch chapter. If you're doing it like through the Calvert Marine Museum, like sometimes I am, I'll put that on there. Um, it really doesn't matter. I mean, some people do it, through high school or through their college or something like that. The most important one to put is your chapter. So we are the Southern Maryland and surrounding DMV chapter. So just type in South and it will pop up. You can see right here, and it's I was trying to guess everything I've ever typed in there before. But you can just select the Southern Maryland and surrounding DMV chapter. If you select any other chapter, I won't see it. We did have one gentleman that was participating in this program uh, probably more than 10 years ago, but through a different chapter. So I just was not able to see his data. You would put your state. You don't really need to put anything else because it's not required. And then you would hit sign up. But because I am already a member, just got to remember my password. I got lucky. So this is what it looks like when I am logged in. I don't believe that you guys can see this, but when you click on data, um, you sometimes get what has been recently submitted across the US. I don't think they're getting much around New York right now. Um, but what I can do is go to my observations, and these are all the observations I've submitted. 906 sounds very impressive, but again, these are mostly from the recording program last year. But you can see these are the ones that I have submitted. So it looks really close to that one map that you guys saw, where we had all of our sites that have been deployed and stuff like that. A lot of these were where I used to live in the Beltway. Um, but what I can also do, which I don't think you guys have access to, is I could also see my group. And so I could see anyone that's ever submitted a observation visually, which this might crash the system because we have over 5,000 observations. Some folks have done little observations there on vacation. I would say don't do that just because there's gonna be different species than what we're used to. But I can even go in with the table and see each individual one when they were submitted and things like that. So I do regularly check this just to make sure it's following the protocols with like the start and end time. But what we're gonna do is I'm gonna show you guys how to set up your own site, and then I'm gonna show you how to enter an observation in. So when you guys first log in, you're not going to have a site. And so you're going to want to go to add right here. For some reason, it defaults to the smack dab in the middle of the United States. We don't live in, I guess that's Nebraska, I think. So what we're going to do is update location is what you click on. And then if you know the GPS coordinates, great. If not, we can find it just by scrolling. So we're just dragging the map, and then I'm going to go over to Calvert County just because that's where I am. Let's go down to the Calvert Marine Museum, which was one of our sites last year. It's kind of urban down there in Solomon, so all we got was bullfrog, but there's also a new pond. So once you have that, you would hit update. You would give the station name a name. I would say call it something appropriate just in case you have something rare and you want to tell DNR or something like that. You don't need to put in the city and county, but you can if you want. I recommend that you do for sure. It just makes it a little bit easier when going through data. You would select your state, and here is where that little slide about the wetlands comes handy. So the land use, if you're down by me in Southern Maryland, it's definitely going to be rural. But if you're where I was in Alexandria or DC, it would either be urban or suburban. The site habitat. So usually in Maryland, it's going to be a swamp or a woodland, a pond, a vernal pool, or a marsh. Those are the more common ones. If you're not sure, ask me and I could try and help you out. But thankfully, for a lot of the other ones, if you're not sure, you can always put down that you're not sure. But like the wetland origin, like the one at my house, is going to be human made. Some of the ones that we have, like in a different parklands and stuff like that, they'll be natural. Water presence, if it's your first year doing it and you're not sure, you could put not known. But if it's like a pond in your yard, most likely it's going to be permanent. A vernal pool, temporary. The water source, again, if you're not sure, you can put that down. But pond or lake, stream or river, precipitation, those are all the options there. And once you have that, you can hit create. I'm not going to just because I already have like 100 stations on here. So thankfully, once you do all that and you enter it in, you could go to your previous stations and they all pop up right here. It looks like I have a lot, but I've just edited some data sheets sometimes, so now they become my stations. So it makes it a little tricky when I'm trying to enter in observations. But let's just do CMM. So that is the one at the museum. So as you can see, there's all the other ones that I have down here in that section of Solomons and St. Mary's County. So we'll put in the observation date. So Frog Watch technically started February 1st. Is anything calling now? Absolutely not. It's way too cold. Um, usually in the past, I've had wood frogs already calling this time of year. Historically, kind of the average is around Valentine's Day. Again, it's all weather dependent. Um, so the light is at the end of the tunnel. They'll start calling really, really soon. But we'll just say the observation date was on Monday. And then just make sure when you do the observation and you're entering in the time, 3 minutes after 7 o'clock will be 7:03. And so again, really make sure, I know it sounds obnoxious that I keep saying it, but it will get flagged in the system and then it won't count. And we don't want your guys' hard work going unnoticed. This is a new development here. For you guys, it would be in person. There's a couple other FrogWatch chapters in the nation that also started doing audio devices last year. So we had I think it was actually a regional coordinator meeting, and we kind of decided to allow audio devices. Back in 1998, just the technology was not there like it is now, especially if we have, pretty high quality field equipment. So when I was entering all the stuff from the acoustic recorders, I would put it in this way. Just the one problem is I didn't have all the weather info, so I had to go back and get historical weather info. Again, too much information for you guys, just put in person. Air temperature, put in what it is right now. We'll just pretend it's 45 degrees and then we'll go to Fahrenheit because 45 degrees Celsius is extremely hot. We'll go to the Beaufort wind scale that we just learned about. Again, 0 to 3 is what is great for a frog watch observation. If it's 4 or 5, it'll probably get flagged in the system. So choose 0 through 3. And again, each site's different. I'm not going to go in there and say I don't think it was a 2 that night. What precipitation, if you're not sure, that would be weird because you're usually doing this when you're in the field right there. No precipitation, which is what it would be right now. On Sunday, we might be getting a medium rain or a light rain or drizzle, so we would select that if we were out there then. If it's a heavy rain or hail, most likely stuff is not going to be calling. So I would not waste my time and go out there. Plus, if it's hail, storms are coming, so I wouldn't be out there. So precipitation for the last 48 hours, not noted if you're not sure. No precipitation, some much. You can put that in there. The temperature of the past 48 hours above freezing, below freezing, if you're not sure. I mean, I would say below freezing. It's definitely dipped down there. Thankfully, it has gotten above freezing, which is nice, but it hasn't really stayed there. But as long as it's above 35 degrees, when you're doing your observation, the wood frogs will definitely still be out and the peepers as well. So again, clearly I have done this a lot, so I'm just going to close all that so you can see what I'm doing. If I were to do it tonight and pretending that it's above 35 degrees, um, and I didn't hear anything, I would put no species heard and zero. So that's really easy because you don't have to go searching for it. Say I want to put in wood frog. Thankfully, you can just type it in instead of scrolling down because if you take a look, there are hundreds and hundreds of frogs. Um, so yeah, just do it easy and then type it in. So say you hear more than one, you can hit add frog and toad observation, and then right below it you can add another species. So like I was telling you that one evening when I was at the high school and there was 5 species calling, I was adding and adding and adding. Say we also heard spring peepers. So I can type in spring and peeper pops up. Don't worry about all these subspecies and things like that. Spring peeper is just what they are. I honestly didn't think they even had a subspecies, but I could be wrong. So say it's a two. You can count individuals, but there's still some overlap or interruption between the calls. And then what you would do is hit save observation. What I usually do is I hit save and add another because they have more than one site. But once you hit save observation, then it goes right into your data and it saves it. I'm not going to do it because I don't want to have to go in and delete it later. But then it is really cool because then you can go to data and you can go to my observations and you'll see your data point in there like live and in action, which is really cool. Um, Really quickly, I'm just going to see if anyone has any questions because that was a lot of information for you guys. Let's see, how do I get to? I'm just gonna hit stop share for a second, just so I can see you guys. So, any quick questions on field scope? So, I see someone asking the question, how do we know how many are calling if they sound the same? Well, once you finish practicing your frog calls, you will know none of them sound the same. So, thankfully, you don't need to count individuals that are calling. It's just kind of broad ones about choruses. All right, let me just go to this chat really quick. So I'm just going to double check there's anything for field scope, and then if not, I'll just go back.
Someone asked how you define sunset.
I think it's just when the sun sets. So I mean, it could still kind of be light out, so that's why it's 30 minutes after. Honestly, I'll just go into my weather app and just double check when it is, so I know. But as long as it's dark, that's 30 minutes after sunset. Just running into a few quick ones. Um, I'm gonna start. Let's see where I can start. So the chapter that went inactive is just the Western Maryland one. We're not going to go inactive, so let me just say stick with us, and we won't. It is hard because sometimes there's only one person that runs them. The software I use for the frog acoustic analysis is Kaleidoscope. It's fairly pricey. It was $400, but we thankfully had a donation at the museum that covered that. Um, yeah, so there are other programs out there that are free. It's just that's the one that I had recommended to me. Very nice about the hot tub. I've actually had a friend that had green salamanders living in their hot tub or on the outskirts of their hot tub in Appalachia. All right, now I'm scrolling down really quickly. I think there is a chapter that does cover Baltimore County. I actually helped them get started. Um, they aren't as active as they've been in the past, but they definitely are active. Um, Yeah, DC is just tricky just because there's not a whole lot of public land. Um, but we do have some sites that were monitored along the Rock Creek Parkway back when I was at the zoo. Yeah, and honestly, if you guys don't hear from a chapter, I am a regional coordinator as well. So I have contacts, so I actually know the people that I train and they still work at the National Aquarium in Baltimore. But honestly, just reach out to me just because I don't want you guys to be like, "Oh, I didn't hear from Baltimore, so I'm not going to do it." You can be a part of the DMV chapter because I mean honestly we have sites out in West Virginia and hopefully the Eastern Shore this year, so I mean it's we won't really be stepping on any toes and I want everyone to participate. Cool. Just going through. So I'm probably not going to replay the individual frog calls. I don't know if that's what you're asking. But this presentation is being recorded, so you can review it. And then we also have the website where you guys can practice frogs as well. We did the sunset one. This long cold spell, honestly, native species are used to it. I know we are not. Um, but that's why with like iguanas fall out of the trees, right? Because introduced species are not used to cold spells. Um, yeah, but that's why for a lot of the local frogs and toads, they wait until it's actually warm enough, like above 35 degrees regularly, before they'll come out and start calling. So the cold really doesn't affect them. As you go over the wood frog, you'll see that they can actually freeze solid and be perfectly okay. But yeah, you will be able to differentiate because again, a lot of the calls sound very, very different. You can do as many observations as you want. I say just do one, just not to burn yourself out. I do several um, a week, but not everyone's like me, and that's fine. So if you have like one site that you want to do, I say make it a specific evening, so then it just becomes a habit. And yeah, just the observation or the monitoring session is only 3 minutes in duration. The sites can be as close or as far as you want. I mean, if they're close enough where you can hear species at both sites, it's probably a little too close. I would not record it from my phone, just because phones are not equipped with the same microphones and things like that that a lot of these acoustic recorders are. So when you do record it from a phone, or even when I've noticed on the acoustic recorders, sometimes the more high frequency callers kind of drown out a lot of the lower callers, like green frogs or bullfrogs. If it's done by a group, I would have probably one person submit the data. So we've done that, say, with like Huntley Meadows, the park manager gets all the data and they have an intern that enters that in from the volunteers that they have. Very similarly with a high school as well, the students go out and monitor, but the teacher is the one that has kind of access to uploading that data. 30-acre wooded farm. I am very jealous, Paula. I would say as long as you can't hear one pond from the other, that's kind of the best bet for that. But I would start out with just the easiest one to get to, and just, you can kind of go from there. I would say usually a wetland is important just because that's where the frogs are breeding. So even if they're calling out in the neighborhood, the main purpose for calling is breeding territory, but it's also to breed. And so there probably is a wetland that you're just not aware of, even if it's just a small pond in a neighbor's yard. Sometimes even a kiddie pool is enough water for them to lay eggs there. So you don't really need to. So for the observation, um, I'd say start with one location. But if you're visiting somewhere and not likely to go back, I would probably not do that observation. Let me see. So like you saw some sites that I had in like Washington State. I mean, clearly someone was on vacation there. I'm glad they heard Pacific tree frog. But that's not really one that we have in our chapter. Um, Yeah, pick your own sites. If you need help, I'm more than happy, especially for a lot of folks that live in Arlington. I feel your pain because that's where I'm from. I'll go into Google Maps or Google Earth and see what's like the closest sites around you. So please reach out. and I can kind of help locate sites for you guys. We do have lots of folks in Carroll County, so thank you. I will definitely reshare that frog call practice link. It's just, I'll
I
type really
I will put
quickly.
it in the chat, so don't
Oh,
worry about it.
perfect. Thank you. How many weeks of observations? So it starts February 1st and goes till August 31st. So that's your window right there. I don't know of a frog identification app. There's not a whole lot of money in amphibians like there are in birds, I guess. Um, I'm sure there's someone developing it. I've heard people talk about it before on social media. But for right now, we got to just do the old-fashioned way and use our ears. I would say goldfish would most likely eat anything smaller than a bullfrog. At the nature center I used to work at, people would dump goldfish all the time, and actually spring peepers and wood frogs disappeared from those ponds. All right, so I'm gonna go back into sharing. Oops.
So you have two people who have questions, Anna and
Okay.
Madeline.
Yes.
If you want to unmute, you can. Anna, if you want to unmute, or
Let me stop the share so I could see them. Did I skip them or did I just not go all the way down to the bottom?
they have their hands raised for like
Oh,
voice
okay.
questions.
Yes. I'll say.
Anna, you're muted.
Oh, maybe she didn't have a question.
She's muted. Hold on.
No, sorry. It said this. It said the host. I said I didn't have permission to unmute myself. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
okay,
Hey,
perfect.
guys. Matt, this is great. It's Anna from Capital Nature. I have two questions.
Yeah,
The first question is when we were establishing stations, Huntley Meadows is close to me, so that's probably where I would go. But like,
yeah.
does that mean when you go onto stations, there's going to be 50 million people that have already put in Huntley Meadows as a station? You know what I mean? Is that individual to the person's account? Or am I going and just looking for a Huntley Meadows station that's already been established?
Yeah, so what I would do for you, especially if it's at a park, I would talk and well, you could just email me, but Karen Sheffield is the person you would talk with since she's the park manager there. So she enters in all that data. So I think what they have for specific parks, I think they have certain nights that they go out. And so you'll kind of be affiliated with a park that way. So she would input that data, but if you had anything else in your neighborhood or something like that, I would do an individual one.
Okay, great. And then I just have one second question. The last thing that you were showing us when we were adding the observations,
Yes.
the question I had is you did an example where you added a second species, but then when you got to the bottom, like where the submit buttons were, there was a second button on the right that said submit and add another. So is
Yeah.
that doing the same thing as what you did above, or are they two different functions?
It's the same thing as above. It just goes to like a different site, so it gets you ready to like upload another observation. Whereas if you just hit submit, then it just kind of stays on the same page, if that makes sense.
Okay. All right. Thank you
Yeah.
very much. Thanks.
Uh-huh. And then Madeline.
Hi, thank you.
Yes.
Two questions. The first one is on the frog calls. I noticed that a lot of them have their calls change. They start out doing one thing and then they do some other things.
Yeah.
When you're monitoring for the call, does it have to have all the parts or just one part of all those things?
So it's tricky. So for the observations with the sounds that you hear, those are several different evenings. So when this gentleman went out and did these recordings, and you'll hear it when we go over it, and I'll explain it. Sometimes he recorded on nights that are warmer than others. So sometimes the trill might be a little bit quicker, or it might be a little bit more high pitch. It's just kind of like how we have dialects a little bit. We all speak English, but we have like different accents and things like that. So definitely temperature plays a big part. Um, but pretty much that same night, all the same species are going to sound the same, if that makes sense. Just because they are naturally selected to sound that way. If they sound very different from one another, they're not going to know that that's the same species that they want to breed. The only one that I know locally that has two parts to their call is the southern leopard frog, and I'll go through that one when we go through the calls in the next slide.
Okay, one more thing is
Yeah.
I have a creek really near me, which is, I mean, that's
Uh-huh.
why I wanted to do this. I can walk, it's a block away,
Oh,
but it
that's
is in
amazing.
a park, okay? It is
Yeah.
a county park. So do I have to get special permission to do this or what?
I would make sure, yes. I mean, if you have to enter the park to get, because so the thing is too, you also need to go into the wetland to do the observation as long as you can hear it without entering it. Like I heard it from a parking lot. That's perfect. But just for the sake of a lot of parks do have rules that they're closed after dark.
Yes.
So just to be on the safe side, I would just because there's police presence in some of the parks, so they want to make sure there's no shiesty activities happening or anything like that. Um, but if you also need help, just reach out to me just because I've been working with a lot of the parks, especially in the DC metro area. Um, since starting FrogWatch, I kind of know sometimes who to contact just to kind of make sure that everything's good to go.
Okay, because it's a creek, it's not a wetland, so I don't know even know if it's,
I
the
mean,
right kind of thing.
a creek definitely is a wetland, and you can get
Okay,
like pickerel frogs and leopard frogs and things like that around there.
great. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, so I'm gonna go in and share my screen, and now we are gonna get into the best part of the presentation, is the frogs. So I think Rebecca just shared the link, but this is just kind of a screenshot of some of the frogs that are on the FrogWatch chapter website. And as you can see, it just gives you rough sizes, kind of rough calling windows as well. So I am just going to go through each call once, just for the sake of time. But you guys have access to the presentations. Hopefully, you reviewed some of them beforehand. So it should have sound on those presentations, and you have the website. Practice makes perfect. When I was out in Georgia with a friend camping a couple years ago, I heard a frog that I'm like, I know this call, but I can't remember. And it took me about 5 minutes. I was like, wait, is that an upland chorus frog? And sure enough, they actually ranged down to where we were in Georgia. But it's not something that I heard pretty regularly. So practice makes perfect, even for someone that's been running a FrogWatch chapter for over a decade now. But this one is the American bullfrog, and as you can see, it is the largest frog that we have here. And you'll see some arrows on a lot of these. It's not important for the sake of FrogWatch, but I always like to try and do some educational component. So visually, sometimes bullfrogs are confused with green frogs. As you can see here, they look very similar, but the bullfrogs lack this line that goes down their side. So they're missing that dorsolateral ridge that the green frog has. So that's just one field mark to tell the two apart. Because I've seen brown green frogs and green bullfrogs, so it can get kind of confusing. But if you hear them calling, it's like night and day. So the American bullfrog, since they're the largest, they're going to have the deepest call, whereas the smallest frogs have that more higher pitch call. So it's a very deep brum, brum. And these guys call late spring throughout the summer.
American bullfrog, Lithobates catesbianus, formerly Rana catesbiana.
So I'm going to pause it there. And so, Madeline, I think you were asking the last question. I see what you mean. So some of the calls that they have on this are aggressive calls. So really just listen to what is in the first half of the sound. So like if I were to go over here, this is usually an aggressive call, like a grunt sometimes. Or like that little eep is like an alarm call. So those don't count as breeding calls, and I think that's what you were meaning. Um, Same for like some toads, they'll have release calls if a male grabs them. Yeah, so it's just going to be, I'll usually stop the training or stop the sound before it goes into all those other weird calls. I think that's what you were referring to. So green frog right here, a little bit smaller than the bullfrog. These guys, they sound like those cereal box guitars I remember making in elementary school, kind of like the twang of that rubber band. or a twang of a banjo string. I've had some students say it sounds like a cartoon, like swallowing really hard, "Uh," like that. That would be a green frog. And they call around the same time that bullfrogs do.
Green frog. Lithobates clamitans. Formerly Rana clamitans.
And that did bring up a good point. Again, I think it is Madeline that was asking that question earlier. Sorry if I'm getting your name wrong. Um, I think what I might do also in the long run is I might just edit these sound files. Lang Elliott from Nature Sound Studios allowed us to use these sounds, but I don't have to use the full sound. So I think I might just cut it short just so you don't have to hear all those weird other parts to their calls. So again, we're just looking at the breeding calls, none of the other ones. So the southern leopard frog is the next one we'll talk about. And so these guys visually are confused with the pickerel frog. So if you take a look, their tympanum or their eardrum, that little circle thing behind their eye that has that white pinpoint inside, that is one of their field marks. They also have circular spots randomly on their body, whereas the pickerel frog has more squared off spots, usually in two rows, and their tympanum lacks that white pinpoint. And then they also have, it's hard to see on this individual, but yellow on their inner thigh. But again, their calls are totally different from one another. So the southern leopard frog sometimes gets confused with the wood frog just because they have a very similar like clucking or chuckles. But for the southern leopard frog, this is the only species locally that has two parts to their call. So it's going to be a series of chuckles followed by a grunt or growl at the end. So they have two parts to their breeding call.
Southern leopard frog. Lithobates sphenocephalus. Formerly Rana sphenocephala.
And I would just point out too, for the sake of the training, ignore the other frogs calling in the background. Like right now, there's a spring peeper calling on this one. On some of the other ones, you might hear like a gray tree frog or something like that. When you're doing the actual observation out in the field, you're going to listen to everything. But for the sake of learning the frog calls, just focus on the one that's in the forefront. So that was a full chorus at the end, and that kind of is a little bit hard to distinguish that grunt at the end. But when you're there in person, you can actually hear it. So it's a little bit hard to describe when it's like 2D sound. We have the pickerel frog. That's the one that we just talked about. So even though they look similar to the southern leopard frog, their call is like a rolling snore or like a rusty porch swing or like a rusty screen door. I'm just kind of creaking back and forth. These guys will call mid-March, kind of when the peepers do, and they'll cut off just like the leopard frog, kind of at the end of spring.
Pickerel frog. Lithobates palustris. Formerly Rana palustris.
So you can hear that there's a green frog that also just called right there. But for the spring peepers, just because they are so high pitched, they carry through and cut through almost any noise. So a lot of these frogs are really not as loud as they sound on these recordings. I just think when Lang Elliott was doing um, these recordings for his like North American Frogs CD, I think he had his microphone right up to them. So just so you guys know. The wood frog, these are one of my favorites, but I say that about all of them. These are the first ones that call in this area. So normally around Valentine's Day, I think it might be a little bit later this year. Last year it wasn't even until March because we had that really cold winter. But these guys, their field mark is going to be this little raccoon mask right here. This mask will always be darker than the rest of their body. So even if the frog is, really, really cold and dark brown, this mask will be like black. These guys sound like a hybrid between a duck and a chicken. When I do in-person trainings, I'll have a vote, and sometimes chicken wins, sometimes duck wins. So we just say like a chicken-duck hybrid. And these guys usually end before April comes. Last year, I think it was like towards the end of March.
Wood frog, Lithobates sylvaticus, formerly Rana sylvatica.
So a little similar to the southern leopard frog, but if you notice, there's no grunt or growl at the end of that kind of duck chicken sound. Usually when I think of wood frogs, I think of that full chorus, just because they usually only call for 2 to 3 weeks. Um, yeah. So, and I've seen these guys with ice on the pond, so they don't mind the cold as much as some other species. And I will point out, I used to use range maps for a lot of these guys. Most of them occur all over Maryland and Virginia, but this is one that has a very neat state on their range, and that is Alaska. So these guys are found north of the Arctic Circle. I believe like Fairbanks is kind of mid-Alaska, so like the Arctic Circle starts like right where my mouse is. So these guys are found north of the Arctic Circle, and they do have antifreeze. It's like a glycol in their cells that prevent them from rupturing. So when they do freeze solid for over like 200 days, when it gets cold over there in Alaska, they can just reanimate when temperatures warm up. I think a lot of local species do have this, but the wood frog is the most studied. So the American toad, we have two species of toads. We have the American toad and the Fowler's toad. They look very similar. There's a lot of different ways to differentiate them visually, but the easiest way to describe, at least for the sake of this training tonight, is the American toad has one wart per spot, or unicolor, whereas the Fowler's toad has several warts per spot. There's a couple other field techniques, but come to a Virginia Herp survey if you want to learn more of that. We're just going to be learning about the calls. So even though they look similar, again, just like some of the other species, their calls are like night and day. The American toad is probably the prettiest call out of all these frogs and toads. They have a very melodic trill that lasts for longer than 10 seconds.
American toad, Anaxyrus americanus, formerly Bufo americanus.
That's the American toad. So pretty quickly, they interrupt each other and can be like a calling intensity of a 2. But that's just up to you guys how you want to rate those calls as you're there in person. The Fowler's toad, on the other hand, is probably the most obnoxious call out of all of them. It's a very nasal, whiny call.
Fowler's toad, Anaxyrus fowleri, formerly Bufo fowleri.
I'll spare you guys. So these guys, it almost sounds like they're opening up their mouth and and just complaining, but it's all in their vocal sac, so they don't even open their mouth at all. And so Fowler's toads do sound similar to the eastern spadefoot, which is why I put these guys next, just so you can hear the difference. So these guys, again, only come out once or twice a year to breed during a heavy rain, and that's it. So normally you're going to have a 2 or 3 calling intensity. It's going to be almost a full chorus every time you hear them, just because they kind of have that one shot. But their field marks are their elliptical pupils, and they have these little keratinized projections on their hind feet to help them dig into the sandy, loamy soil. So these guys, a similar call, but instead of an aggressive rah, it's a like a sad or sick cow is how I think of it. So it's just the vowel shape's a little bit different.
Eastern spadefoot, Scaphiopus holbrookii.
So Fowler showed is rah, and these guys are. That's the eastern spadefoot. If you hear these, consider yourself lucky just because there's only 1 or 2 sites. Usually report them a year. Now we're going into the tree frog. So the eastern cricket frog is part of that group, believe it or not. They have tiny little suction cups on their toes. These are the smallest of all the frogs in the area. They're also called northern cricket frog. They've recently had their name changed to eastern cricket frog. So either one works because it's both the same species. It's Acris crepitans, normally under an inch. So these guys are so small, their sound is almost mechanical in nature. So it sounds kind of like the hollow sound of like a spray paint can rattling, or like the clicking or clacking of marbles together. So it's very, I don't think it sounds like a cricket, but that's how they initially got their name. So these guys call late spring throughout the summer.
Northern cricket frog, Acris crepitans.
Obviously a bullfrog. So you guys get the point. So very high clicking, clacking sound. Their field mark is going to be this little triangle that points down. So even if they're all brown, they'll have it as well. But they're really variable in color, but that little triangle is their little indicator mark. Spring peeper, these guys are also fairly unique. Don't sound like anything else. Literally get their name after what they sound like. These guys, again, fairly small, a little bit larger than the cricket frog, and they get their field ID with this X on their back. The upland chorus frog looks very similar, but will not have that X. The name crucifer, crucifix, kind of like that cross or X on their back. That's how you could identify them in the field if they're not peeping.
Spring peeper, Pseudacris crucifer.
So there's a Cope's gray tree frog calling in the background. That's the little brrr that you hear. So you get the point. Upland chorus frog, these guys can sometimes visually be confused with the peeper. They are not as prevalent in the area. They don't do very well with urbanization. So since we moved down, or I moved down to Southern Maryland, and we moved the chapter in 2023. We've had 3,000 observations submitted, and only 10 were of the upland chorus frog. So these guys, it's going to be like the plastic teeth of a comb if you're just running your finger along it. Actually, before I get into this, I see like there's a lot of activity in the chat box. I just want to make sure no one has any quick observations if they're getting confused with some of the sounds.
No, it's good. People ask for copies of the slides, and so I put it in the chat, but I
Oh,
also
perfect.
said that if they put their email in, I will send them everything later.
Okay, great.
So
I just
people are
wanted to
just
make
putting their
sure.
emails in.
All right, perfect. Thank you. So the upland chorus frog, so it's like the teeth of a plastic comb, just running your finger along it. And yeah, so the upland chorus frog, and the next slide I'll show you the New Jersey chorus frog that you don't really need to know unless you're on the eastern shore, but it just shows how these guys, different species, have different calls slightly, even if they're formerly the same species.
Upland chorus frog, Pseudacris ferriarum.
So that's the upland chorus frog. So if you take a look, the Chesapeake Bay and Susquehanna is a barrier of both of these species. And if you're on the eastern shore, you'll get the New Jersey chorus frog. So it's the same exact call. It's just on like a 33 speed on a record player. It's just kind of longer and drawn out.
New Jersey chorus frog, Pseudacris calmi.
So unless you're on the eastern shore, you don't really need to know that. But again, both chorus frogs sound very similar. Just their call is just again like the 33 speed on the record player for the New Jersey chorus frog. Green tree frog does not really get confused with anyone else. It's a like a honking, like a clown car, kind of like those horns on like a bicycle. I think of these guys as summer callers.
Green tree frog, Hyla cinerea.
I think you get the point. These guys are usually pretty loud, so they will drown out other species. But if you're there in person, it's a little bit easier to hear. So they do get cinereous racing stripe. It's kind of in their species name. A lot of the ones in southern Maryland I've seen just completely green and lacking that stripe. So I think it's just kind of dependent on where you are in their population. So this one is a little bit more confusing. We have the gray tree frog complex. So these guys I think of being kind of late spring throughout the summer callers. You have two species that you could potentially have. You have the Cope's gray tree frog, which is the only one we have in southern Maryland. But if you're in the DMV, you'll definitely get the gray tree frog as well. At my pond in Alexandria when I lived there, I actually had both calling. The only difference really between these two is DNA. I believe the Cope's has a higher chromosome count and the calls. So similar to like the upland chorus frog and the New Jersey chorus frog, these guys have the same like 2 to 3 second trill. It's just the gray tree frog, Dryophytes versicolor, their call is going to be like the 33 speed. So I'll start with the Copes. I'll pause it and go to the gray tree frog, and then I'll play them both together so you can kind of see what I'm saying, how the Cope's gray tree frog is just a more rapid version of the call.
Cope's gray tree frog, Hyla chrysosceles.
Oops, sorry. There's Fowler's toads calling. I was trying to point that out.
Cope's gray tree frog, Hyla chrysosceles.
I'm going to pause that. We'll go to the gray tree frog.
Gray tree frog. Hyla versicolor.
So you can also hear peepers and you can also hear green frogs. So just try and pay attention to that slower trill. Now also play the copes. So I'm sure that was chaotic, but hopefully you guys kind of understood when I played them both together that really more rapid succession and then the kind of the slower speed of the gray tree frog. So thankfully, for the sake of the assessment and or for the FrogWatch observations, if you are unsure which gray tree frog it is, you can put gray tree frog complex and it counts. In terms of the assessment, if you guess the wrong one, you'll get it wrong, but you can put gray tree frog complex and you'll get it right if you guess for either one. But I would say be brave and just practice your calls. And again, practice makes perfect, but the copes will have a more rapid succession. So these guys are the eastern narrowmouth toad, which we have in the northern neck of Virginia. We have them in southern Maryland and also on the eastern shore as well. Maybe Calvert. We're trying to do a study this year to see if they are in their historical range, but they haven't really been found in Calvert since the 1970s. So these guys, pretty unique sound, kind of like a sheep or like those goat memes that the videos go around every so often on social media.
Eastern narrowmouthed toad. Gastrophrine carolinensis.
They are not that loud in person. He must have had the microphone right up on these guys. Oh gosh. All right, let's go back and do that again.
Eastern narrowmouthed toad. Gastrophrine carolinensis.
These guys are similar in habit with the spadefoot, that they kind of are more burrow dwellers and will come out a few nights a year to breed, coinciding with the rain. So they will be fairly explosive breeders too. The next ones are not going to be on the assessment, but they are on the website just so you guys know what's out there. If you're on the eastern shore, you could definitely get the barking tree frog. If you're in Charles County in southern Maryland, in the northern neck of Virginia, or on the eastern shore, you can definitely get the carpenter frog. Both of these guys get their names from what they sound like. So think about a bunch of beagles in a wetland. That would be the barking tree frog.
Barking tree frog. Hyla gradiosa.
And then the carpenter frog, it has like a ricket, 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 like a hammer and nail kind of sound.
Carpenter frog. Lithobates virgatipes. Formerly Rana virgatipes.
And last but not least, again, this is not on the assessment, but if you live in St. Mary's County in southern Maryland, we do have an introduced species. And my guess is, as global as everything is nowadays, there'll be something else that pops up. So the squirrel tree frog also gets its name from what it sounds like. I am not as proficient on this one yet, so I can't mimic their call, so I will just play it. But again, there's about 4 or 5 sites in St. Mary's now where these guys have been found.
Squirrel tree frog. Hyla squirrella.
are green tree frogs in the background of this one too. So I will open it up to questions. So I know it's a lot of information and a lot of people do get overwhelmed, but like I said, practice makes perfect. Thankfully, all 19 do not call at once. Most of the time, you're only going to get 8 or less. And it's going to be the more common ones too. So it'll be like bullfrog, green frog, probably Cope's gray tree frog, probably American toad, probably Fowler's toad, maybe green tree frog if you're a little bit closer to like the Potomac, um, cricket frog, spring peeper, and thankfully a lot of them call at different times of the year as well. So I was just giving an example of like a rural habitat where I live, where there's 5 that can call at once. Um, but yeah, it does seem overwhelming, but practice makes perfect. I am here to be your Jiminy Cricket, your conscience, and I'll answer any questions you have, whether it's tonight, whether it's a week from now, and you had a question about something else that you thought of. I'll be more than happy to try and help you find wetlands too, especially if you're in more urban or suburban areas.
So
Yeah.
someone in the chat asked, oh no, I just lost it. When we take the assessment, can we have a list of names of the different frogs and toads and maybe some descriptions of their calls to help us remember?
So I do on the test, I do have like kind of like a word bank of all the frogs that could be on the exam, and I don't repeat any of them. There's no like gotcha questions or anything like that. Um, you guys have the slide, so you can have all the descriptions there of them, or if you were taking notes tonight, it's open notes, so you can definitely use that as well. I just don't have that on the assessment itself. I do have the names of all the frogs, though.
Great, thank you. Someone
Uh-huh.
asked, how have the squirrel tree frogs arrived here and from where? Somebody said the Bahamas. Is that accurate?
No, so squirrel tree frogs are native to the southeastern United States. I think the county, just because I was doing a paper today, um, they're the northernmost county they are found in Virginia is Spotsylvania, no, Caroline County in Virginia. So it's really not that far as the crow flies. My guess is either from a nursery or someone just moved plants. Um, my guess is a nursery, especially if they're popping up in a few locations, probably inadvertently brought them from the south or something like that. Is my guess. Thankfully, I mean, when I think of invasive introduced frogs, I think of like the Cuban tree frog down in Florida that get massive and will eat everything. Thankfully, the squirrel tree frog is smaller, about spring peeper sized, so it's not going to be a big competition for like eating other frogs and stuff like that. But I mean, there could always be introduced diseases you have to worry about and things like that coming from somewhere that's not local.
Someone asked, what commitment do you wish us to make once a week from now until August?
Ideally, once a week or whatever time you can commit. I just always go back to keep saying once a week just so it becomes a habit and you don't forget about it. I mean, I understand people have lives and things like that. Mine is it's not as regimented just because I know I'm going to do several sites several times a week. I do have sites that I visit more frequently than others. I don't expect people to have 5 sites and stuff like that. So I always just say one just to keep it easy. And then if you go like, this is nothing, I can easily do more, then definitely do more for sure. But I just always say start off slow and start off small, just so it can become a habit and become something that you love. Um, oh gosh, I forget her name now. But she used to do it's not Doris, but she used to do a lot of the trainings with me out at the Front Royal campus, and she was actually participating in FrogWatch before we even had a National Zoo chapter. And her and her husband would make it a date night on Friday nights that they would, go out and listen to some of the frogs, and then they would go out to dinner afterwards. So it's kind of you can make it a cute thing as well.
And the most recent question is its arrival related to the invasive frog, related to climate change, do you think?
It could be. I mean, the warmer it gets, you're gonna see animals moving northward. Um, one animal that I've seen pop up from time to time are alligators in Southern Maryland. They're not supposed to be here, but it just doesn't really get that cold anymore. If you think about where a lot of the alligators, the northernmost part of their range, is in North Carolina, and it definitely freezes there. And you've seen like the viral videos of them like sticking their snouts like above the water so they're able to breathe. Um, I just think, with people moving stuff, I think stuff will be able to survive, a lot more than we thought. And usually it'll be like physical barriers like mountains or like the Chesapeake Bay or like the Potomac River. There's going to be some pretty big obstructions for animals naturally colonizing an area, but there's no reason why, like, if an animal lives in Caroline County, Virginia, which is less than, 50 miles as the crow flies, there's no reason why it couldn't live in Southern Maryland too. It just has to have a way to get there. And usually people is the reason.
Thank you. Joyce asks, if we go on vacation out of the area for 3 or 4 weeks this summer, is it okay if we skip those weeks or is it going to mess up the data?
It won't mess up the data at all. And I mean, honestly, any data is better than no data. And people have a life. I go on vacation too. Um, And so, yeah, I'm not going to be doing observations during that time of year either. It's just getting back into it. It's just like when you're sick, usually you take a break from working out, and then getting back into working out is always the hardest thing to do. Um, yeah, you're definitely allowed to go on vacation. You're allowed to have a life and everything like that. Even if you go out and you don't hear frogs, that doesn't mean it's a bad sight. So sometimes you might have bullfrogs and green frogs, but you don't have spring peepers. And so I've had a lot of folks get frustrated at the beginning that they don't hear anything. But like I'll go out and just there's not as many species that call when it's cold out. And so kind of like I put, no species heard in a calling intensity of a 0, that's still data too. And that's really important to see that, hey, spring peepers weren't here, but then 5 years down the road, maybe they'll move in to that area. So that's always important too. Just because you don't hear something, that's still data that is good to report. But yeah, please go on vacation because I love vacation. And yeah, I would always say just a break is always nice too.
Lauren has her hand raised. Ask a question.
Yes, you
Go
can
right
go
ahead.
ahead. Oh,
Sorry, I
there you
just
go.
figure it'd be easier to ask this than to type it. So I haven't heard back from the Baltimore chapter yet, but when you go to make an account on like the actual data logging portal, you have to enter your chapter. So
Yeah.
should I reach out again and try and hear back from them, or should I just make an account with the Southern Maryland chapter to get started as soon as possible?
Yeah, I would say just start with the Southern Maryland chapter. Send me an email and I can put you in touch with them. I think they I was talking with Jess and she was saying that she was adding someone else because I think they're trying to do like a greater Baltimore chapter or something like that that includes the zoo, just so they have more help. Sometimes I think a lot of the chapter leaders also get overwhelmed just because like this is not the main part of my job. It's just I love doing it. So sometimes they just need help. But I would say just to do the Southern Maryland surrounding DMV chapter and then you can always go in and edit it later. But if you just send me an email, I know who it is, so I can kind of put you in touch with them. Awesome, thank you. And again, my email, I will send Rebecca a follow up with just everything in there. Um, just yeah, with quiz links if you want to take them. It is Jessica Nelson. Yep, you got it. I love her. She's awesome. And I think it's 2015, I think, when they started it up there. Um Frederick, Maryland would be our chapter. We have a few sites up there in Frederick. But yeah, I'll pass on the information so it can get disseminated with if you guys have any questions with my email, as well as a follow-up with just the Calvert Marine Museum FrogWatch website with the 19 local species, just so you can practice, as well as like the PowerPoint so you guys can review them and just go through the protocols and stuff like that if you need to. And then also, I find it easier just to send out the quiz links. I'll try and regularly look at them but I would say try and take the quiz within the week just so I don't like forget to look at it, 5 weeks from now. And just because stuff will probably start calling within a week and a half, 2 weeks, which it makes me very excited to say that because winter is my least favorite time of year because there's nothing out there calling. There's no snakes or anything like that. So, yeah, if you guys have any questions, and you think about it, 10 minutes from now when this training is over, please send me an email. I'm more than happy to help you guys find your own sites, anything. So thank you guys so much for coming and really hope to get some cool observations from you guys.
Thank you so much, Matt. This was great. There are a couple of questions in the chat. I don't know if you have time to answer
Oh,
them.
yes. Yes, I do.
Someone asked that they have a culvert nearby that they were going to listen to, but in the past they've only heard frogs in the summer. Should they start now or wait?
Yeah, I would start because maybe you're just not outside as much in the winter. I know I'm not. So I mean, you might be surprised what is calling.
And then someone else asked, why did the genus change for many of the frogs?
Yes, genetics, genetics, genetics. So basically, when they did this, I think it was around 2006. So that's right when they changed Bufo to Anaxyrus for the toads. So a lot of the stuff is going to be old world species that then they did it with a lot of the rat snakes too, and a lot of the skinks as well. Um, yeah, so basically, a lot of the genus or the genera of frogs is now New World species. So Hyla for the tree frogs is now Dryophytes. That was actually within the past year that's changed. Um, say for like the toads, Bufo changed to Anaxyrus. For a lot of the frogs, Rana or Rana changed to Lithobates. So it's just scientific names. Sometimes the common names change. They haven't found it in Maryland yet, but down in the Tidewater area of Virginia, up in New Jersey, and New York, they have the Atlantic coast leopard frog. So that's Lithobates cawfeldii. So that's why they changed the southern leopard frog to coastal plains leopard frog. They're both the same species. But it's just because there's been other species added that have kind of, take a similar range up, like the southern leopard frog. The test is just to kind of ensure that you know the protocols and that you know the local frogs too. That was just for Roland, who just asked that question in the box. And then Roland, I'll make sure in a follow-up email that the Natural History Society will send out. We'll have all like the websites to Field Scope, also to the FrogWatch chapter as well. And all the recordings are going to be up there. And I'll hang around too if you guys have any other questions that you think of.
The only other question I'm seeing is people asking which chapter they should join or how to find that chapter.
I will say just join the National, oh gosh, National Zoo. Yeah, clearly it's late, right? I should have some coffee. The Southern Maryland and surrounding DMV chapter, I would say just join that one, and I'll put that in the follow-up email as well. Um, just because we have a very broad kind of range of the areas we do. Um, we are probably the most active one in the area as well.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for coming, everybody.